through Pipewire using Pulse Audio, and I'm using Jack GUI tools to route the audio, which is amazing that I can do that.
All right, guys, we should be live. Hopefully, everybody on YouTube can hear us. Let's get a yay or a nay from the YouTube chat to make sure that they can hear me and make sure they can hear you guys, because you guys are on a different audio stream than me.
Well, I'm always in a different audio stream for you because I'm that cool and so awesome that I have to have my own audio stream separate from you, Derek. Unfortunately, I just have to share it with these plebeians called your patron.
Yeah, all of y'all are on the same stream, unfortunately.
Yep.
It'd be nice if everybody had their own audio stream that I could adjust the levels separately, but all I can adjust is me versus you guys.
Well, I think Mumble is like the only application that actually does that.
Yeah, unfortunately, Mumble is
it's
not the most user-friendly thing. It's the only thing, yeah.
It's not.
That's why I've never bothered trying to get people to use Mumble, because I've played with it a little bit and I've found it cumbersome because I know most people are not going to fool with it. So let's see. Yeah, everybody says yay in the chat for the audio. Chat sounds good. Very cool.
Nice.
Yep.
Oh, that is a first.
I already started an argument in the chat, by the way.
About Gen 2, I'm sure.
Nope.
All right. Well, some of the got a lot to discuss actually, because it's been a busy month for Linux, open source software in general, and a lot of projects that have had new releases, big releases. One of the things I wanted to just briefly talk on, just because it was kind of breaking news here in the last few hours, was GitHub going down for a little while. I don't know why people freak out when a site like GitHub or sometimes GitLab go down for service or something. A lot of times with GitLab, because I have an account there, they'll send me a heads up. Hey, we're going to be down from this block of time, doing something. Don't be surprised about it. And people are like, well, GitHub can't go down, right? It has to be up 24/7, 365. If GitHub goes down, the entire open source community will just, I guess, burst into flames, right? It's like all of your stuff is stored in Git anyway. Git, like even if GitHub went down and never came back up, if you have that Git repository stored on your system locally.
Hey, there's some people that probably live in there.
The main reason why is because GitHub really is very prominent in a lot of the, not necessarily corporate open source projects. Like obviously Gnome's not going to use GitHub, but in like the independent developers use cases, that's where GitHub is actually truly popular.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I'd say probably like 80% of independent open source projects are probably hosted on GitHub, or at least have a mirror to GitHub, which is a pretty big deal, because GitHub is prominent because at this point, one could argue that many people know GitHub better than they know Git.
Well, you can't really use GitHub unless you know how to use Git. I mean, I guess you could use the web interface, but it's kind of... It would be weird if you didn't know how to use Git, but you were on GitHub.
The Windows GitHub application makes it so that you don't even have to use the Git command line.
Yeah,
pretty much. And then like the code, and then like the GitHub integrations into the Atom text editor, VS Code, are just very prominent in those projects.
Yeah, I could understand that. I mean, I guess I don't really need to know the Git command since I use Emacs, because Maggot takes care of so much of a...
Speaking of Emacs,
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I have officially forked Fedora just to make my own Emacs-based operating system.
Okay.
At this point, I have a machine that boots directly into Emacs via automatic login.
Now, let me ask you, what do you think that... Obviously, Emacs is a creation of the GNU project and the Free Software Foundation. What do you think they think about you making a GNU Emacs operating system based off non-free Fedora?
It's actually not non-free Fedora. We don't have RPM Fusion enabled at all. and we are using the Linux Libre kernel.
Okay, that's what I was going to say.
It is GPL compliant Fedora.
Yeah, if it's not using Linux Libre, it's not really. Stallman will not approve.
Nope, Stallman would not approve.
Stefan, you were trying to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say about GitHub that somebody perceived to be a tech advisor actually had a complaint about it. That it didn't explain to him how to run a script somehow and within GitHub, and I think this cruel laziness everywhere kind of came overboard this month. I don't know.
Well, Linus Sebastian from Linus Tech Tips, he did. I agree partially with him in that it's very important, these people that just throw stuff on GitHub, to actually put a README. You at least tell people how to install your program and run it. Because if they'd have just said, hey, download the script, chmod it, and then execute it, he'd have known exactly what to do. But, and it would only take a developer 30 seconds to put up a simple installation instructions for a bash script. It's not like it's complicated. So some of it is laziness from developers.
Yeah, both parties.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Hey, Ben.
I had the absolute, I hate to say this, but the absolute worst frustrating time on the Gen 2 IRC today.
I already knew. He's back on Gen 2. When he said he was frustrated, I knew he's back on Gen 2.
Well, dude, here's what happens. So I go on there because I got a brand new motherboard, a brand new Ryzen processor in my tower. Okay, and I said to them that this happened because my RX 560 graphics card died, and I had to get an internal graphics GPU thing, whatever. And I tell them the model, and etc., and that I need to specify in the kernel the /lib/firmware, whatever graphics card thing it is, because I couldn't get on the wiki because right now it's down, and I don't know why. So I told them this, and they said, well, just put AMD GPU to a module and forget about it. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound too helpful, guys. So
if I could interject from them, I could tell you exactly why Gen 2 Wiki was down.
Why?
Somebody made a change that included an emoji in it, and it crashed the Media Wiki instance that they use.
Oh, good.
They don't have it patched. They don't have it patched for emojis.
Nope.
What the hell?
Yeah.
Man, of all the things to take something down, that was not on my bingo
Oh my
card.
God, that is sad.
Well, that's not actually uncommon. I mean, me and Ben have dealt with this with all the suckless software, DWM and DMenu and ST. They can't handle emojis unless you patch it in such a way where...
Yeah, you have to use libxft BGRA in order to...
Yeah. Otherwise, if you enter an emoji in DWM, it's going to crash.
Yeah, it's the stupidest thing. And we literally spent like 30 minutes in the past on Jitsi trying to fix it, and it just was the stupidest thing of having that package not installed.
I argue with people over ZFS and the Gen 2 IRC all the time, so it's perfectly understandable.
It's not uncommon for some idiot like me having a graphics card issue to feel frustrated by that.
Yep.
The graphics card can't handle emojis, huh?
Yeah, well.
Well, here's an interesting thing. Going back to the Linus install script thing in the chat, Ariel says that the script was meant to git clone the repo. So if he'd run the script, it would git clone the repo for him.
Yep.
But still, you got to tell him how to run the script.
Yeah, it's not GitHub's fault at all. It is entirely that project's fault for not telling him how to use the Git repository for its intended purpose.
Yeah. His fault was right-clicking on a web link and using save link as and thinking it wasn't going to save the entire HTML.
There were 3 mistakes that he made. The very first one was, of course, the right-click save as, where he just saved an HTML file. The second mistake he made was that when he copy pasted the raw data output into a text editor and then saved it, he never actually set a file type for it. So the system didn't know which program to use for executing it.
Well, it was a shell script, so it should just...
not every shell script actually just works right out of the box.
If it's got the shebang in it, your system should.
It depends on what shebang. If it's a shebang bin sh, it won't.
Well, they should always use user bin in the bash, right? I mean, you should always just specify bash for a Linux script.
Well, you should always specify the shell that you're programming for, because
I can understand if it's for FreeBSD or something like that, but if it's for Linux, man, just put bash as the shebang because you know it's there. So,
The whole shebang.
yeah.
And then, of course, his third mistake was never actually taking the time to learn actually how to properly compile things from source, because you can just Google how to compile from source or how to run scripts on Linux, and you will get information on how to git clone a repository, as well as how to invoke the wonderful magic that is /install.
Now on that though, like he's trying to come at this from a new user. I don't think a new user needs to be compiling software for their system.
Well, no, he's using an Arch-based distro. There's really no reason for him to do so.
It should have been documented pretty well then, right?
Yeah, then what he should have done for his Go XLR is that same package is in the AUR, which ideally that's what he should have went was with the AUR package for the Go XLR mixer that he was trying to use the script for.
Yeah, but the problem with most Arch-based distributions, including Manjaro, they usually don't have the AUR turned on by default, so he would have had to Google that. He did? Okay.
Yeah, he did. He says earlier in that video he turned it on. The problem is that, of course, he's using Manjaro and Arch, which by extension says that you should figure this stuff out for yourself rather than tell you to do it.
Well, yeah, the Arch guys. I mean, technically the Arch user repository, because it's anybody. I mean, any of us can throw something on the AUR right now, this second, and it will be live, and then people can start using it. Nobody's ever going to check the package that we upload to it. So that's dangerous, right, for the user, because who knows what I could have put in that package. So that's why they tell, especially new users, hey, don't use the AUR, even though everybody uses the AUR.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere it tells you the AUR is not officially supported, which is why new users should not use any Arch-based distribution. I don't even know particularly why he chose Manjaro to begin with. It might have been because he's toyed around with it in the past with like the ARM-based Linux products that he's done reviews for, like the Pine Book, the Pine Phone, all that.
Well, he was having problems on his on Pop OS with his hardware.
It was Pop OS, but he could have just used like even just a mainline Ubuntu or Debian, which actually had that issue solved at the time. It was literally just a Pop OS specific issue with the apt package manager.
But I can understand. You know, he's thinking his newer hardware is probably a Debian kind of issue, and why go to another Debian-based distribution? You know, go to Arch since you already tried.
Well, it's kind of popular now.
Debian is.
So. Well, Manjaro is kind of popular right now in some circles, and I think maybe that he was advised to use that.
Manjaro has always been very popular in the gaming community because it's basically just pre-configured Arch that is quote unquote stable, and it's still relatively upstream, so you can use your latest and greatest hardware.
Well, I mean, even Steam has decided that an Arch-based distribution makes sense for the Steam Deck because of having the latest drivers and having the latest kernel. I mean, that's what you want as a gamer.
I think that was a good call on your part.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Because before they were using Debian Stable, and that thing, that's too old. That's too old for what they're trying to do.
Wasn't SteamOS based on Debian as well?
Debian Stable.
SteamOS 1.0 was based off of Debian 7. 2.0 was based and released on Debian testing at the time, which turned into Debian 8.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah. In the chat, they said Linus said he used Manjaro specifically because SteamOS is going to base off of that. Yeah, that's makes sense, right? That's kind of.
Hey, and there's so many to choose from. You got to choose one. You know, I mean, you just can't. Linus isn't going to distro hop.
No, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Manjaro. Like if as a a distro for somebody that's kind of new to Linux, and is especially somebody that's going to be hardcore into gaming, I think that was a good choice on his part. I have no problems with him choosing that distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, I didn't like that he didn't know Pac-Man wasn't the package manager. Because that's kind of strange. Because, and here's another thing. People were like, well, you're harsh on him not knowing the package manager, because a new user, how would a new user to Linux know even what a package manager is? Well, he obviously knew what a package manager is because he did a sudo apt-get install. So he knew apt-get was a package manager. So like he knew what they were. It wasn't like, he had never, he'd done some research. Hello? Can you hear me?
It's not audible.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, one of the things with Jitsi is you can mute other people. So I think somebody accidentally muted me instead of themselves.
I was wondering what happened. I thought I lost all audio for a second there.
Well, that's the problem with Jitsi. I mean, it's great. It's free and open source software, but everybody here technically owns the room. Like, we can just kick each other out of the room.
I got muted by somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it happens. It's one of my complaints actually with Jitsi for a long time is not necessarily the muting, but the fact that we can just kick each other out of the room.
I think there's a way you can actually fix that in the settings.
I'm sure there is, and people have told me, well, if I just hosted my own Jitsi server, I think it adds some extra control, but I'm not trying to do all that just for 2 hours a month.
Sounds like work.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if it was a much bigger problem than what it is, I would just use Zoom. I know, obviously, Zoom is proprietary software, but at least it solves all of those problems.
Well, I gotta say, I'm calling like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 times a month with clients, being a freelancer, and I've considered actually hosting my own Jitsi server now. But yeah, Zoom, the thing is, it's spyware. It's basically spyware. You can't use it. And still, I gotta have something that works as simple as Zoom does, because on the other hand side, on the end user perspective, they just basically click and it works right out of the box, whereas Jitsi doesn't.
I do think that if I remember right, like the free version of Zoom actually limits the amount of time you can actually have a video session open as well. If you're hosting, I think it's actually hard limited to like an hour or something like that.
40 minutes.
40 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's unlimited, I think, if it's just two people on the call, but the minute a third person joins, then the timer starts. You got 40 minutes to wrap it up. So that you have to have a paid account, basically.
And I honestly, I don't want you paying for Zoom, to be honest with you.
Oh, I've paid them before.
I know you have,
too.
but...
Yeah. I may even still have, I'm sure I still have an account. I'm not paying them now, but occasionally people do ask me to join Zoom calls. And in life, people, like maybe somebody wants to talk to me or somebody wants to interview me for something, maybe go on a podcast or their YouTube channel. Hey, I want to interview you on Zoom or Discord or, some piece of proprietary software. I'm not going to tell them, no, I'll only meet you on Jitsi. No, I'll fire up Zoom and I'll meet them. I'm not that crazy. I'm not Richard Stallman crazy.
Actually, I have a question to ask here.
All right.
What do you feel about these distros that call themselves gaming distros? I had one named Roger OS. It's basically just a normal XFCE distro, but it comes pre-installed with Wine, Lutris, and everything. So do you feel that it just wastes your network by just making you download a gig more, which can just be done after installing a native Arch only?
I'm not much of a gamer. I do know a little bit about Draugr OS, and it's Debian-based distribution or an Ubuntu-based distribution?
It's Ubuntu-based.
Ubuntu, yeah, and XFCE, but it's kind of customized. Yeah, it kind of has. It almost looks like it's like a media center kind of. It has the big buttons and as far as the user interface and everything. And it does say, like, if you were a brand new Linux user, most Linux users are not going to know what Wine and how to install Steam and Lutris, because these are not in the repositories. I mean, Steam's proprietary software. You can't just sudo apt-get Steam, I don't think, unless Ubuntu has added it to their repository.
You can with Ubuntu.
You can? Okay.
You can.
Debian, it's available non-free as well.
Yeah,
but I know.
Snap.
Well, yeah, the snaps are different, yeah, because that's where they typically put the proprietary software. They'll snap it instead of, because, Debian's not going to have it in the repositories. So
Debian does have Steam in the repositories.
Not in the standard the non-free repository doesn't
the
count.
Non-free repository, but
Yeah.
the non-free repository is an official repository. It's hosted by Debian.org, so it is official. It's just not recommended.
Well, if it's not turned on by default when you install it, it's not really I guess it's an official repository, but it's not meant for people to use, I guess.
It's an officially not recommended repository that's hosted by the official project, so I would call it official, just not recommended.
But as far as, these so-called gaming distributions, many of them do serve a purpose because a lot of them use a different kernel. Most of them will ship with the Zen kernel rather than the standard generic Linux kernel. And I think that's what Draugr does. I know that's what Garuda does. So what most of these so-called gaming distributions do, and that's nice because a lot of, especially new to Linux users, they're not going to know how to uninstall the generic kernel and then install a Zen kernel, for example.
I tried using the Zen kernel. I basically put up a benchmark on both of them, but I found out that there is not much of a difference. It's only about like 5 to 10 FPS, not much.
Yeah. Probably a lot of it, too, has to do with hardware, what kind of equipment you're running it on. For me, I've never done any real testing because I'm not a gamer, so I don't typically fire up games and then benchmark them. But just everyday work, doing stuff on my computer, I've never found a difference between like the regular kernel, the real-time kernel, the Zen kernel. I mean, at some point I've had all of them installed, just playing with them. But you can't really tell a difference. It's not a difference that's ever going to be perceivable, I think, to human beings. It'll be perceivable if you're benchmarking things because there'll be millisecond differences. But yeah, you're probably not going to notice it yourself.
I've saw many times that people who are new to Linux, they constantly do distro hopping just because of the DE. But do you feel it's dumb because you can just do a sudo apt-get or sudo pacman and then just install the distro on the DE on the same distro that you're using? Do you feel it's dumb to just distro hop for the DE?
It depends. If it's for example, if you were on GNOME and you wanted to check out XFCE, it makes sense just to go ahead and sudo apt install XFCE because it's still a GTK based distribution or a desktop environment. It's going to have some similarities to GNOME. It's not going to be like having GNOME and KDE Plasma on the same on the same Linux installation. Is a little different because they really have no similarities at all. It's a completely different toolkit, different suite of applications, and so I found that GNOME and KDE together on a system over the years, they typically don't play well together, but most of the GTK-based desktop environments, they're fine, all installed on a single installation.
Because on Roger, when I was using Draugr OS, I did not like the XFCE that much, so I installed KDE with it. At first, I tried to distro hop to a different KDE, distribution, but then I went on to some forums, and all of them said that it would be dumb to do that. So I just installed KDE along with it. I faced some issues in the starting, but then a few simple tweaks did it. So do you feel like newbies should just distro hop for that, or they should go and take a deep look into the system and then try to fix it by themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, they fix it themselves. The big problem that I have with gaming distributions is that they're great for just gaming, and then all the other daily use cases, all the tools that they have set up and targeted specifically for gaming, the distro is just more suboptimal at. I've used stuff like the gamer edition of whatever random Arch install it is. At the end of the day, it is Arch Linux, and of course Arch Linux will break. And then because the system is so customized, specific use case for the gaming setup, the pre-installed NVIDIA drivers immediately crash the system, and you have no idea how to fix it because for some reason they didn't put the they didn't install the NVIDIA drivers the proper way. They installed using the proprietary script from NVIDIA.com most of the time, which then leads into even more issues.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many moving parts with gaming on Linux that honestly, there's only so much you can do to get somebody started. And a lot of ways, it's almost like the way Arch does its installation, where it makes you partition your own drive and create your own user, just so you know how to do it. I think this is a situation where in a lot of cases, the user it's best for them to install their driver, to install the Zen kernel if they want it, to install Steam, Lutris, whatever gaming platform they, let them do all of that. That way, they know kind of what's going on a little more than.
Really, I think SteamOS version 3 might actually be a path towards actually fixing the issues that I have with gaming distros. And until Valve actually releases SteamOS for public use, we won't really know what kind of approach, because they've already said that they're using Arch Linux with an immutable file system. So it's going to be set up similar to like how Fedora Silverblue or maybe even potentially NixOS might be set up.
Yeah, it's gonna be like an OS tree kind of situation.
Yeah, which really we can't really comment too much on it other than just like outside of speculation, because we don't know anything about the SteamOS other than it's Arch Linux and it boots straight into SteamOS and it runs underneath KDE Plasma.
If they wanted this immutable system, now I'm wondering why they just didn't base off of GNU Geeks for the SteamOS. That would have been.
I wonder why they didn't base off of GNU Geeks.
Stallman would have a heart attack. Steam running on good, all that DRM.
He would not. He would have a field day with that, Derek. Yeah. But I just tried the Gen 2 wiki on this laptop as well. It's still not loading. I'm like,
well, I hope it's just a situation like Josh said, and it's not a situation like it was last time a few years back where they lost the wiki.
Yeah.
Entirely, and they didn't have a backup.
Yeah.
Like they lost the server, and nobody had ever backed up the Gen 2 wiki, so they had to start all over.
I think they have the wiki stored in Git.
So, now they do.
Well, anyway, I'm not sure what to do then for my graphics card, because, like I said, it needs that list of blobs inside the /lib firmware folder, and I did an ls on it, and it's not telling me what I need. And like I said, it's a Cezanne iGPU, and I'm not.
Maybe Ben.
I'm like, oh my.
There's this fantastic Linux distribution that you may or may not be involved with. It's called StormOS. Maybe it's time to actually go back to running that.
Oh my god.
No, he hopped from. He wanted to get off the Arch base onto the Gen 2 for a reason. I mean, he had a purpose. It wasn't like he's just doing this just to hop.
No, exactly not.
Yeah.
I mean, in my eyes, if I'm going to run something with 12 cores, I might as well run Gen 2 on it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. You might as well.
Yeah, and regardless, I mean, I could.
I mean, I've got 12 cores, 24 threads, and I'm not running Gen 2.
It's 6 cores, 12 threads, actually, Derek. But I mean, still,
Yeah, still a lot. Better you than me, Ben.
Right, exactly. So, I mean,
one thing I wanted to talk about Stefan's problem with video conferencing on Linux. He said he didn't want to do Zoom because it's spyware. Microsoft, is really friendly to the open source community these days. And it's weird, but they're actually releasing their software for Linux, which is something that would have never happened 5 years ago. But now they're releasing all their stuff as native Linux clients. So Microsoft Teams works well on Linux.
I have a better solution. It's called all these wonderful things. It's called Zoom. Works perfectly fine in a web browser. And Firefox has a wonderful feature with tabs where you can containerize
you can containerize it. Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
And it's available as a Flatpak, which is further sandboxing.
I wonder if you could just FireGel your video conference. I don't know if that would be an option or.
I have taken time before to experiment with like how sandbox can we make an application before. So I was running it inside a virtual machine through a containerized format like Flatpak into a lockdown hardened tab in a web browser.
I've never looked into any of that myself as far as video conferencing software, because it's one of those things people talk about, privacy and stuff. But I mean, obviously, when you're on camera, on a microphone with somebody else, nothing you say is private. Nothing you do is private, no matter what you do. Mm-hmm. So there's only so much you can do.
What's the old adage? You know, if you think there might be a possibility, you should just assume.
Yeah, it's like the people that are on Twitter all day long, leaving all these crazy messages, and then they wonder why 10 years later their boss finds out about that one crazy thing they said years ago about them. Well, you put it on the internet, so it's there forever.
Yep.
Yeah, Zany in the chat. Yeah, this doesn't seem to be a Gentoo install. Yeah, we're not doing a Gentoo install today. I've done, I don't mind. I actually like playing with Gentoo. I like Gentoo-based distributions. They're one of my favorites. I'm not gonna lie. I enjoy. Every time I install Gentoo, I have fun. But it's one of those things. It's like the town that you like to visit. Like I like going to New Orleans. I like going to Bourbon Street, and I like partying once a year.
But you don't want to live there.
I don't want to live there. I like going to Vegas. I like going to the casinos. I like going gambling. I don't want to live there, right? That's the vacation spot. Just Gentoo. Gentoo's my vacation spot, but it's not my home.
I like that. That's a good analogy there.
Getting back to Teams being available on Linux, Microsoft Edge, of course, is seeing a new release soon, the new stable release on Linux. And it's almost to the point now, Linus Torvalds years ago said, hey, if Microsoft ever starts making applications for Linux, then we've won. I think at this point, it's happened, right? At this point, open source has won.
But where do we go from here?
Exactly. Now we just need to do something with it, right? I mean,
because they say it's about the journey, not the result, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because really, the only voice out there that was really trying to sway people from free and open source software was really Microsoft. I mean, it was Steve Ballmer back in the day, 15 years ago. And now when you have the CEO of Microsoft saying he loves open source and he loves Linux, at that point, that battle's over. We won that fight. Now we need to.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who have been around long enough and used Microsoft long enough and know about what's gone on over the years that I think that, there's some outdated. We're at a time now where there's going to be a lot of outdated sentiments.
Yes, because Bill Gates was really anti-free software back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Steve Ballmer, obviously, in the early 2000s was very anti-Linux. But those guys don't matter. They haven't been involved in that company in decades. I mean, they're not going to be on this earth much longer. I don't know how old Bill Gates is, but he's not a young man, right? At some point, you can't keep blaming what Bill Gates said 40 years ago on Microsoft today, right?
Yeah, I think that it was a time and a place, and the world has moved on.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. And this is one of the things that I give Richard Stallman credit, and he's said this many times, why he goes to like the Microsoft campus to speak to Microsoft, which he did, about 2 or 3 years ago. Why he does that is because if he didn't think that a company like Microsoft or Apple or Facebook could actually change, then why the hell does he even talk about this stuff? There's no point at that point, right?
I still think that it's worth actually taking this with a grain of salt, though, because it is ultimately Microsoft, which is listed on the public stock exchange and funded almost entirely through investors.
Well, they love Linux because Linux makes them money. I get that. I know that, but still, I'm happy that they love Linux, regardless of whether it makes them money or not. I don't mind people making money with free and open source software. That's what we need.
So I'm saying that what Microsoft is doing right now is not necessarily bad, but we should still be somewhat skeptical, because even though Microsoft is doing these great and amazing things, we have to remember they were still suing companies for literally using Linux less than 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'm skeptical of every company. Any corporation. I mean, I'm skeptical of Red Hat and Canonical and SUSE. I'm skeptical of Oracle, VMware. I'm really skeptical. Right? There's a lot of people that are involved in free and open source software companies that I'm very skeptical. So obviously, Microsoft and Google and these companies, they don't get a pass. I'm skeptical of them, but I am happy if they are using free and open source software and promoting it and making billions or trillions of dollars in some cases off of this stuff. I'm happy because that's important. I think that's really the next step of really us winning that battle for free and open source software, is where it becomes viable, where people can make money developing free and open source software.
Do you feel that systemd really deserves the hate that it gets from some Linux users? Because many Linux distributions maintainers have said that we should blame the distro maintainers instead of the creators of systemd. So, which is the real evil here, systemd or the distro maintainers?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What is the number one argument against systemd? It's bloated. So if systemd is bloated, you have to realize why systemd was created. Systemd was created to be able to enable the use of user-level init system scripts, which is not necessarily a feature of all the other init systems I've ever seen on Linux. And making a systemd service is far easier than learning how to write an init script. Which, if you script your init system, or you script your init script, your system no longer boots, and you have to chroot or reinstall your operating system. Which, if you script your systemd service, systemd will sit there and spend 1 minute 30 seconds sitting there trying to enable that system service. Which, if it doesn't, it'll just skip it.
Well, the people that have a problem with systemd, a lot of this is just legacy hate, because a lot of the people that hated systemd either hate systemd for two reasons. And the first one is they were using the old sys5 init system on Debian and Ubuntu based servers, because there's a bajillion of them out there. And now systemd comes along. I got to rewrite all my scripts, my custom scripts that worked for my old init system. I don't want to learn the new one. Well, it's been 10 years since systemd has become the de facto standard init system. Get over it by now. The other reason people hate systemd is because they don't like the guy that created systemd, Lennart Pottering, the guy that also created Pulse Audio. And they just generally, that guy, it's not that they don't necessarily like his software. I mean, Pulse Audio and systemd have issues. But when people were filing bugs and things like that, Lennart Pottering is not very nice.
No, he's not the nicest person.
He's not a nice guy. So they don't like the guy that created systemd either. So a lot of the systemd hate is kind of unwarranted.
I actually asked this question because I've heard this from many Linux users that when they were newbies, they never actually cared about systemd being in the system or not. But when they came to know about the system, then they were like, oh, why there is systemd? Get rid of it.
Right.
Well, most desktop Linux users don't ever interact with their init system anyway. Even me, I'm a nerd. I don't do anything with systemd. I mean, it's very rare I actually do anything at the command line with like a systemd command, like a stopping and starting a service or setting up a systemd timer. Like I might do that twice a month.
I don't interact with systemd every single day, I swear.
Well, I mean, this Gentoo obviously doesn't have systemd unless you purposely installed it. But
yeah, I'm probably the guy that interacts with systemd the most, because I'm sitting there, so I'm spinning up and automatically starting Podman containers using systemd. So I'm messing with it at least every single day, and I'm interacting with it. And I'll be honest with you, I much prefer systemd to sysvinit or even OpenRC.
But unless you're a system administrator, I don't even know why people even talk about the init system or the systemd hate, because if you're just a Linux desktop user, you don't even need to be talking. That's why I don't talk about it. That's why I don't make these videos about, oh, systemd is bloated and it's horrible, and try to stoke the fires and get because it doesn't matter. Like let's be realistic.
I mean, I personally think that I honestly follow the philosophy that defaults matter. So I don't care what the distribution ships as long as it works. And if it works for the distribution, that's fine. Systemd fixes fixes a lot of issues that people were having with Linux back in the day. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it just fixes so many things that nobody else has actually even fixed, even though they just do nothing but complain about systemd. It's almost like they even forget what systemd was intended to fix.
They do. I think.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. Even though I don't interact with systemd that often, I will say creating a new service in systemd is so much easier than it was.
It really is.
Like it's a night and day. Like people don't understand because you would have had to have been using Linux, 10, 12, 15 years ago to have used the old Upstart init system or the sys5 init system. And those were a little more painful.
Back in the day, setting up your LAMP stack to interact with your init system, so that way your LAMP stack started automatically
in the correct order.
Right. You had to sit there and carefully write your init scripts, which didn't use any syntax similar to anything else in the system.
Yeah. That's another thing. People talk about all the bloat with systemd. Is a lot of that extra code actually does save so many headaches because systemd manages things starting and stopping in the correct order, where before you had to manage that stuff yourself through scripting. And it's so much nicer. I mean, it's so much less of a headache.
Recently, a lot of people have been debating about NixOS versus Arch Linux. So, like, what do you feel? Which is better, and what should newbies go for? Nix is very flexible, but from a beginner's view, has already done a bit of distro hopping on Debian systems. What should he go for?
Oh, I mean, if we're talking about newbies.
Okay.
A newbie would not have a good time with something like Nix because they would have to script a config file and they wouldn't know how to do it. Like it would be such a big learning curve unless somebody was already willing to do that. Where Arch, you can read the wiki and install Arch, no problem.
There are several distributions I will never recommend to people because I am of the opinion that they should consciously make that decision themselves to use that distribution.
Yeah,
I'm curious as to if you can guess which distributions I'm talking about because it's all the ones that require manually installing it because they don't have a graphical installer.
I was going to say Gen 2 is probably at the top of that list.
Gen
I would
2,
say
Arch Linux,
Slackware is probably
Void Linux, and like several others.
Yeah. So, but to be honest, I mean that rather lengthy list. I mean those are niche distributions. Let's be honest. There's not that many people using Gen 2. There's not that many people using Nix. I mean, they're great distributions, but they have a purpose, and that purpose is for a small group of people who love that distribution, by the way. I think Nix is great. But my grandmother shouldn't run it. That would be a bad time. So,
and I think that's where the Linux community in general really falls short is that they write it for these ultra niche or these enthusiast situations, and they kind of forget the basic user that they're like, well, why aren't you coming over? We've created all this for you.
Well, I don't think it's the developers like the people that created Nix and Geeks and these kinds of distributions. They know why they created it. It's a special use case. The problem is the people that use these distributions then become fanboys, and now they feel like to validate their decision in whatever operating system they're running, I have to go tell the world about it and try to convert everybody over to Nix because somehow that will make me feel better. Or it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what distribution I'm running, you're running. It's like, dude, if mentally you think somebody else's choice and their distribution somehow is a reflection on you, you need to go talk to some kind of mental health professional. But unfortunately, we have a lot of those people in the Linux community that need help, but they haven't sought it yet. So,
really, this is where Linus for Linus Tech Tips does actually raise a fair point. You shouldn't discourage the manually configured distributions like those, but there should at least be a distro that's truly and honestly truly for the beginning user.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Ubuntu is not that distribution. It never was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was close. I think as you could get.
I thought Ubuntu in the 1204 to 1404 range when Unity was kind of good, like it was, because I could put that on machines for friends and family and they just loved it. I never heard from people like that was really good. But then Ubuntu decided, let's scrap Unity, let's forget about the desktop, and let's make money on the server, because that's the only place we're making money anyway, was in the server market. And once they abandoned the desktop, they were really the only company trying to make money with desktop Linux.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like there's other desktop Linux distributions that are community based, but they were the only big corporation that had money trying to do it. And then they gave up. So now we don't have anybody as far as a corporation trying to do desktop Linux.
Well, what about like elementary and stuff? They have that, what is it? It's almost like a value for value model for their store and stuff. And you know, I don't know if they're a corporation.
The big problem with elementary is that it's not like the problem with elementary is that it doesn't have that $1 billion investor behind it like what Canonical had.
It's a small group. Yeah, it's a small group of. It's not like Canonical or SUSE or Red Hat, which are the companies. When did a company like that to actually say, "Hey, we're going to make Linux desktop great"? They're not interested. They're not interested at all.
System 76 kind of doing that.
System 76
does not target the normal desktop user. They target specifically the power user. You can just go to the Pop! OS website and confirm that for yourself.
That's true.
The problem with System 76 is they're targeting the kind of people that can pay, $1,000 plus for a laptop. That's
they're almost the Apple of the Linux.
Right. Exactly. They're never going to gain mass. So. Yeah. They're
do
never
you feel Linus
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you feel Linus made a mistake that from Debian he straight away went to Arch? Or do you feel he could have did a bit of distro hopping on Debian based distros only? After Pop he could have went for Linux Mint as well, for which Luke went?
No, I didn't catch that.
He wants to know why people are distro hopping between Debian based distributions.
Oh, no. Why do people? I think a lot of people distro hop between Debian based distributions is because Debian itself is not the most user-friendly distribution. I think the biggest problem with Debian for many years is the fact that they made it so tough, or you had to jump through some hoops to install non-free software. If you can't install non-free software, then 99% of the people installing Debian can't use it. And the fact that that's not turned on by default, that's really what led to the rise of Ubuntu and the bajillion other Debian-based distributions, is because of that decision to not have non-free software there available to you by default out of the box. Which I'm a free and open source software advocate, but let's be real. Your computer hardware that you have to go and buy a computer from the store, most of the time that's going to require non-free drivers for your graphics card, your Wi-Fi card, and your laptop. You can't do that with a strictly 100% free distribution. You have to have some non-free software. So that's the thing that held Debian back from gaining mass adoption on the desktop. It's a great server distribution.
You turn it on and it runs, basically. You turn it on and never touch it again.
I love Debian servers. You install it and it runs for 10 years without a reboot. And that's you forget you even have it. Right?
Yeah, and then when you look at it, you're like, I wonder if that still works.
And it does.
It does. Unless you have a hardware failure.
In many cases, they're still on that same version of Debian too.
Going back to a little bit about what we were talking about with different desktops and different flavors of these different things, you have to remember that a lot of these distributions are created with a certain purpose in a mind for a community, or the way that these creators wanted to work. But if you go back to the creation of the Linux kernel, I'm sure back then Linus had no intention of it ever getting to the point it has. And I think that I'm sure desktop wasn't in mind, there was no other. So and it just kind of became a beast of its own. And it's amazing that the Linux Foundation even has control of the Linux kernel at this point. I think that shows the respect that the community has for the founding of it. But it's just a wild mess. So it's like that bundle of Christmas lights you pull out of the box every year.
Mm-hmm. I mean, to make Linux distributions required a ton of work from the distribution teams of Slackware and Debian, for example, in the early 90s. The GNU project, they had to shoehorn all of their GNU stuff into the Linux kernel because they were designing all the GNU stuff for the herd kernel, which, it never happened. But so then they had to fit it all to work with the Linux kernel. And yeah, a lot of that stuff was not really designed for desktop use because a lot of that was like getting the shell to work, getting some of that lower level stuff to work that a typical computer user really doesn't care about, right?
I feel like Luke has tried much more to get engrossed into the Linux community and try to learn it because I guess everyone has noticed it that if Linus is getting an error, he's probably just not paying attention to the error messages or just not doing the effort. But when we see Luke's side, he's always googling things and trying to solve the errors by himself. So do you see that plays a major
Yeah.
role
Okay, so
in
then
like?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but here it comes down to the point of the difference of like how Linus lives his life compared to Luke's. Linus runs a multi-million-dollar company, whereas Luke just runs a branch of the company. Linus has 3 children and a wife that live with him full time. Luke, as far as we know, does not.
Well, I don't know anything about their personal life. I actually don't watch a lot of their content. But I have seen enough of it to know. Yeah, he's right as far as the observation. Yeah. When I see Luke doing something and he gets a message in the shell, for example, he'll actually read it. He may not understand what it means, but he'll read it. Where Linus is like annoyed that it even spit out that message. And he doesn't even read it and then just keeps going and then wonders why his desktop environment got uninstalled when the message said, hey, we're about to uninstall your desktop environment. Do you want to continue? You might want to read that message.
I maintain and operate three local nonprofit companies in my area. It is a very busy life when you are the one that is the guy that is supposed to be answering all the questions. Yeah. It gets extremely busy, and just like you just target that mindset where it's just like, okay, this thing isn't working, we need to find something that actually does work.
Yeah.
Just something entirely different, which is why he distro hopped.
Yeah. And I was being quite sincere in my video the other day when I said it looks like he's just having a bad time on camera. He doesn't want to be doing this because I've done that. I've made so many videos. And occasionally people ask me to make videos, do things. And I finally, I'll make this video on this topic I really wasn't that interested in or don't really care about. And then it just kind of pissed me off because then I get into this. Things aren't going my way. I didn't want to do it in the first place. And then it just comes across on camera as, hey, I hate this. This is garbage. It's not worth my time. It's not worth your time. Where really I'm being completely unfair. Well, I shouldn't even be doing that video at that point, right?
Well,
I should just turn off the camera.
I think I can relate to that too, but I think with Linus, you have to remember that almost all the videos that he does are scripted. Somebody else writes it, and he teleprompter.
Yeah, but I don't think somebody scripted like his app to get error messages and stuff like that. Like some of that.
That's where you're seeing LTT off the cuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh boy. And for those in the chat telling me to put my mom with LFS, not gonna happen. You don't know what the F Linux is.
Mom needs a package manager.
My grandma runs Arch Linux.
Yeah, wow.
Well, you know what? If you installed it for her and set it up with a proper desktop environment and a graphical software center and things.
Desktop environment, sir.
And you set it up to automatically update, or you SSH into it once a week and update the. Like Mom could probably handle Arch Linux as long as you set it up properly for her at first.
Right.
Look, if Mom can use Chocolatey on Windows, you might have the possibility of success using Linux.
Yeah.
Well, my grandma runs Arch Linux. Her user account does not have sudo privileges. And her Arch Linux does automatically update via systemd services, and it only updates once a month, and it's literally just an Xorg session that boots into Firefox with a full screen session that points to gmail.com because that's all she does.
Well,
so you just set up a kiosk for her, basically.
It's a kiosk, and she's been operating like this for about 4 years now.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if my mom was actually somewhat technical and that kind of thing, maybe I would give her LFS, but that's like, trying to put a small guppy in a shark, so I'm not going to take that chance.
You have to remember that there's a generation of computer users where Windows was an inconvenience.
Yeah. Well, she didn't grow up with computers. So like giving her LFS would be a nightmare.
Well, yeah, I mean, my mom worked for a state department or for a department within a state government, and she was using, WordPerfect and DOS.
Right.
That in the 80s, and then we're like, oh well, we need to get a home computer so she can do some of the work from home.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where our
It's
first
just
computer
one of
didn't
those
even have
things
Windows.
where she doesn't know jack shit about a computer. So
Right.
she's basically like one of those users who just lives on email, Facebook, those kinds of things. So she's not.
Yeah, that's typical computer users, right? Obviously, the crowd here, we're nerds, but normal people,
I mean,
that's what they do.
This is literally the reason why Chromebooks are so popular, is because at one point they were just a web browser.
She also does Rosetta Stone occasionally, so Linux would not be a generation. A good.
Yeah. Most computer users now, I mean, I see, like my family members, and I would say 95% of their time on their computer involve Facebook. As long as they can open a browser and go directly to Facebook, they're happy.
Yeah, exactly.
But the actual thing is that most of these users are on their mobile phones now.
Yeah,
exactly.
That too.
So there's like 3 to 5% of overall Facebook users.
Yeah, like desktop computer
desktop.
sales actually saw their first increase ever when the work from home movement started last year.
Most people's computer using is pretty much could be a dumb terminal at this point.
And,
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where we moved away from the desktop because a lot of the stuff that people. But you have to remember, more people than ever are using computers now than they were in the mid '90s. Of course, the desktop made sense because you needed that.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an opportunity now too, and why, like Linux on YouTube is kind of blowing up here in the last 5 years or so. As far as a lot more people are interested in stuff like this, it's because of how dumb the computer has become. And now when people see some of the cool stuff that you can do on a computer if you choose to, you do have people interested in it, because in many cases they didn't know some of this stuff was possible until somebody showed it on camera.
Right.
They thought all the computer was Chrome and Facebook.
That's all most people think it is nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I still remember when people would call the box the CPU.
Yep.
They look at the computer and go, "The CPU over there."
No, or you go to
the tower. The CPU is inside the tower.
No, the monitor only. Like the CRT only was the computer. That's it.
Right.
Well, 70, 80 years ago, the CPU was over there in that corner. And the memory was over in that corner.
Well, these days, if I tell my family, hey, I bought a new computer for home or for the office. Oh, a new computer. Does it come with cloud?
Oh my God.
I was like,
I have
what?
not heard that yet.
What?
Yeah, I've heard that. Does it come with cloud? I'm like, yes, it does.
I was like, yeah, it had cloud pre-installed.
Well, every time I type the cloud or whatever, I will put parentheses around it.
I don't even use that term, the cloud.
I don't like it either.
All the cloud is it's having stuff on a machine that you don't own. That's all the cloud is.
Yeah.
It's your stuff on somebody else's server.
It's a buzzword now.
Right.
Somebody else's computer, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's things where somebody comes to me or a family member or whatever comes to me with a technical problem. I'm like, or we could do this, but I wouldn't do that to you. It's just how much of a headache is that going to come back to me?
Oh, I don't even give friends and family options if they ask me to fix their computer problems, because normally, I just don't have time to fool with it too much. Like, hey, this computer's broken, do something with it. I don't even ask them what I'm going to install, what desktop environment. I just go with something, set it up, give it to them, however they get it. And most of the time, I'd say all the time, actually, that works. Mm-hmm. If you actually try to explain choices to them, typically you confuse the hell out of them.
That's usually the first mistake.
Yeah. Then they confuse the hell out of you trying to answer you.
I think it was a year ago. Somebody made a video called "Don't Give Users Choice, Give Them Ubuntu."
Oh yeah.
If there is a problem, they will find it.
Yeah, that for years. I mean, that's worked out for me. In my laptop bag, I just keep a USB stick of the Ubuntu LTS. and it was, oh, my Windows laptop is broken. You're that Linux guy. Can you do something? I don't even tell them what I'm putting on it, anything about it. Just plug in that stick, install it. Here you go.
Yep, you're good to go, man.
And call me if you have any problems. They never have any problems, right?
Exactly.
Because they can see the big button that says Firefox. That gets them to the face page. That's all they needed.
That's all they need to know.
I don't even. Most of the time, I don't even call it Firefox anymore. I just.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Larry.
I got muted. But yeah.
Yeah, something happened.
Yeah. Somebody hit the mute all button. But anyways, what happened was that I've ran into issues before where like I've actually had to take the Firefox icon and rename the text title from Firefox to like a website. This is no longer Firefox. This is Facebook using the Firefox logo and stuff like that.
I mean, you can create, these web applications, basically a container for launching Facebook inside Chrome or Firefox, and you can actually put a Facebook logo on it. I mean, if you wanted to get that creative for somebody, I mean, you could set all that up for them to where it looks like, hey, Facebook is right here, this icon on the desktop. Let me click it, and it goes straight there.
Yeah, but then they go to their friend's house, and then they try to show their friend how to do it, and then you've completed now you've introduced chaos theory into the whole
Oh,
thing.
yeah. And it's like, how do you get to Facebook? Don't you just launch the Facebook icon? What Facebook icon?
Oh, can you imagine if that was crapware or bloatware on new computers?
Well, it may be on some proprietary operating systems, but not on Linux, thankfully.
Well,
Also, many people use third-party encryption softwares to encrypt their system like Veracrypt. But do you feel when Lux is given, then you should just not use those third-party software?
where did we jump to disk encryption?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we can talk about it.
Should you use disk encryption? The ideal answer is yes, you should use disk encryption.
I would say this, again, has to... Well, we got to talk about the user here. Are they going to remember the password or the key to get... like... If you encrypted your file system, for example, your hard drive, and then you, for whatever reason, lost the password,
You're screwed.
that could be it. Yeah, you lose all your data.
There's no way out of it.
Right. So,
Unless you're synced with the cloud.
well, again, a new user, I guess it's a different for people like us. Like, yes, obviously encrypting your drives makes sense.
Of course, you should encrypt your drives. But my question is, people are using third-party softwares for that when Lux is given to you. So, do you feel that's just a dumb move, or you should actually use third-party software?
Should people use proprietary
Lux,
software when Lux?
he's asking, should they use something when Lux is already there? I really don't have
You mean like
much of an opinion
or something like that?
If the user wants to use encryption, some encryption is better than no encryption for a specific use case. As for the encryption protocol, it's on the user to determine what kind of encryption protocol they should use. Ideally, Lux is better than Bitwarden because we can actually audit Lux and not audit Bitwarden. But at the same time, Bitwarden is effective at what it does. We just don't know how secure it actually is.
I will say there's also a reason why, even though a Linux distribution obviously could encrypt your drives by default out of the box during the installation process, there's a reason none of them do, or very few of them do. There are some risks involved. Like I said, it's kind of it's one of those things you as a user, you've got to know if it's right for you. It's not a one size fits all thing.
But I think the issue of using the encryption that comes with it versus a third party or a second an outside, I think that's a valid question because
it is. Yeah.
Whether it's like you brought up whether it's proprietary or not.
Yeah, I mean I've never used any of these third party services. So even like the password managers and things, I know people ask me about things like Bitwarden and LastPass. People ask me KeyPass, things like that. I always manage my passwords locally with the standard pass command.
You got a little
Linux
address book that you keep.
Yeah, I keep all my I keep all my GPG keys stored locally.
Honestly and seriously, I'm going to say this now. I honestly believe that the sticky note with the password on the computer monitor is more secure than most password managers.
Yeah.
If they're online.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Mine are stored locally, right? So I don't deal with any of that. So
my mom used to keep a little password book thing that you get at the dollar store, you know.
But that's why I can't really. That's why I can't really comment on it, because if I haven't never used these products, I can't tell you Bitwarden's good or LastPass. You know, I can't. I can't speak on it.
Okay, I guess.
That said, I don't think you can use a lot of the proprietary options with Linux for disk encryption. If we're talking about disk encryption itself, I think it has to be Luke's, because that's the only thing that Grub really supports. Which I think Grub is the only bootloader that can actually unlock an encrypted disk. I think Systemd boot might be able to, but I'm not certain on it.
I don't know. I only use Grub, but I would think Systemd by now should be able to handle that. It would be weird if it didn't.
Well, guys, luckily for me, I was able to pull up the AMD GPU part of the Wiki for Gen 2 in the Wayback Machine. But when I scroll through it, it tells me the LSPCI grep VGA, and the problem is that tells me that I'm using a Cezanne graphics controller, and when I go down to the thing where it tells you to list the firmware, it's not telling me what the Cezanne blob is. And I'm like, okay, this is a head grinder, so I don't know what the hell to do.
Ben, you and I should probably talk about this after the patron stream.
Yeah, this is going to be. He's got some
let
weird
us
hardware.
Gen 2 users figure this out for ourselves here.
Yeah, okay. I'll get on your Discord after this.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So.
And what kind of computer, by the way, are you installing this on?
A custom built, Derek.
Okay.
It's a custom built AMD system, switching from the dedicated graphics card to the.
It's an internal graphics card.
Okay.
Yeah, to the Vega chip.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's going to be some weird hardware.
Yeah.
I mean, yes,
Derek, if
obviously.
you want to join us, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, I might hang out for a minute too.
Yeah, after the stream. Yeah.
Because I figure a little Googling usually solves the problem. We're usually good at that.
Yeah, we'll be in his Discord, so yeah.
Well, we could also just hang out here because DP doesn't use a Discord anymore. For the
I mean, I have Discord, and so I have a Discord account.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we can do that too.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, because like I said, sometimes people do ask me to meet them on Discord, so I do have an account.
Yeah. But anyways,
Yeah.
What were we talking about before that?
We were talking about how awesome Emacs is.
Oh yes, Emacs. I have been using Emacs for 3 weeks now. I'll be honest with you.
I wanted to hear about it.
Yes, I actually booted up Patreon.com in Emacs, which it rendered horribly, by the way. But I could still get the room window name for this Jitsi session, which is currently running through an Emacs buffer.
Yeah, the Emacs web browser, EWW, is great. Yeah, it doesn't render pages horribly. It just it's almost like a text-based browser, but it displays images. Right?
It displays images. You can launch MPV through it. So
I actually think the way it displays HTML pages is actually rather clean.
It's both clean and brilliant.
Yeah, like it's much easier to read a page in EWW than it is in Firefox or Chrome. Right?
That said, I'm still struggling to learn Maggot because I've used a Git command line my entire life up until this moment, where this is the first client I'm legitimately trying to learn how to use. It's a difference from when you've almost mastered the command line.
Yeah, I need to force myself to use Maggot more. The only reason I don't use it all the time is because of my Git bear repository that I have set up for my home directory. I have it aliased to a word that's not Git. Mm-hmm. And that makes Maggot freak out. So I can't use it in my home directory, which that means that anytime I want to push to my .files repository, I'd have to go to the terminal anyway. I can't use Maggot for it. So I just use the terminal for all my Git stuff. Where if I didn't have that Git bear repository, I'd probably use Maggot all the time.
But yeah, I initially used GNU Emacs because I figured if I'm going to learn Emacs, I'm going to learn it the hard way. Which I did get it relatively serviceable, but I'll be honest with you, I've since then switched to Doom Emacs.
Yeah.
Which
And I
does
think
make
that's,
some things a little bit easier.
I think it's worthwhile to at least fire up GNU Emacs and learn how to open a file, save a file, and quit using the standard key bindings.
Yep.
Just because sometimes your Emacs configs will break and you will end up in a session of Emacs that only the default GNU Emacs key bindings work. So it's nice knowing, hey, Control C, Control X, to get out of it. That way you're not stuck in that weird Vim situation. So many people, I don't know how to quit. At least you know how to quit. So.
Yeah, all you do to quit, if you want to save, it's WQ exclamation point, but if you just want to quit, it's Q exclamation point.
In Emacs, it's pull up a terminal and just kill all Emacs.
Oh, God. That is literally something I've ever heard all my life.
So have you played Tetris in Emacs yet?
I have not. Because, and the main reasoning behind this is that I'm using a Dvorak keyboard, which kind of screws things up in itself.
How's the evil key bindings with Dvorak?
So the big thing with like the Vim key bindings in general is that I didn't learn through hand position. I learned through like where the letters are on the keyboard. Yeah. So whereas I think on a QWERTY keyboard, H is in relatively the same location. It's actually where the J key is, and then the P key is where L is. J and K are where X and C are on the normal QWERTY keyboard. So it's just like I kind of just learned generally where the letters are, and that's how I think of it. So making the conversion from like Vim to Emacs is not necessarily that bad. That said, it is a bit nicer to use like the Vim key bindings on a standard keyboard than it is Dvorak, but it's not undoable.
Yeah. Well, obviously it's nicer because it was designed for that keyboard. I mean, they kind of had it in mind, right? Yeah, that's the only reason I don't switch to some other keyboard layout, because people, hey man, you should check out Dvorak or Colmac or something like that, and it's like, oh, HJKL, I can't move them. I don't want those keys to move.
Really, I just decided to make the switch to a different keyboard layout. That way I could actually force myself to learn how to touch type. That's really it. Because prior to that QWERTY keyboard, I just never really got around to learning, even though I used stuff like blank keycaps and stuff like that. I never really learned that practice.
So, how are you liking org mode, or have you played with it much yet?
I have been playing with org mode. I still don't know all the syntax, but I've played around with org mode, and at this point, I'm rewriting my entire website in org mode. I haven't gotten around to using like the org mode themes yet. I'm just rendering it out to plain text HTML, and I did like some basic color changes to it.
I mean, you can write your own CSS themes if you don't want to use somebody else's. Yeah, I'm just lazy.
I haven't gotten around to playing around with that too much yet.
Yeah. Plus, I just don't like web designing. It's not something. When I was, a teenager, back in the 90s, that was fun. But then I started hating the web, everything about it. And now, like now, I'm not even interested in web dev stuff at all. Like I just find it repulsive. Joseph DeGarmo, I want to say something to you in chat because you're mentioning, can Emacs run Crisis? The answer is yes, technically speaking, because you can launch Crisis through an Emacs buffer. Now you can run anything inside Emacs.
I was going to say you could probably run the Crisis dedicated servers.
Yeah. The problem with Emacs as a window manager, and the reason I don't use it as a window manager, I've tried it. I played with EXWM, and the problem is Emacs itself is single-threaded. Meaning, if you use Emacs as your window manager, it's single-threaded, it's slow. When you're doing really CPU-intensive things like the stuff I do with the video stuff, where I'm pegging my Threadripper, and the Threadripper is a beefy CPU. I can peg it at 100% depending on what I'm doing. Emacs will just hang for a long time.
Well, the main reason for that is because of the Linux scheduler. It will actually bounce that process around between cores, which sometimes cores are busier than others, and will always take the largest process and put it on the most available core. So the main reason why Emacs hangs is because it jumps to a different core, and Emacs isn't built to expect that. No, because it doesn't have multi-threading support.
Yeah, that for years now, one of the biggest complaints that the Emacs community has had with Emacs is that single-threaded nature of it. Like we've got to have multi-threading at some point because it's a limitation.
That said, I'm not necessarily doing like development in Emacs. I'm actually just largely using it as a writing machine for the most part.
You will start doing some Emacs development because once you learn some eLisp, you're going to love that language.
I have been toying around with Lisp. I am beginning to slowly learn it because I have learned that parentheses are superior to commas in Lua.
They really are.
They really are.
It's weird when we're talking about programming languages. I used to think Python made so much more sense than every other programming language because when you look at a piece of Python code, it is obvious what everything is. Oh, that's a variable. That's a list. That's an array. This is a key value pair association. Like it's because parentheses is around some things, quotes are around some things, braces are around some things, brackets are around some. So they're different items, different things. Where when you open up an eLisp script, it's parentheses everywhere. There's no other punctuation other than parentheses, and it makes it's like you're reading ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics when you first look at it, until you figure out what the parentheses mean. And then you're like, it makes total sense. And then you start wondering why these other programming languages don't just use parentheses. Like, in many ways, I find the way eLisp does things far superior than anything else. Shell scripting, Python, even Haskell. I love Haskell, but the beauty and simplicity of Lisp is actually something amazing. I think Josh is going to like.
Well, really, Python is, I wouldn't say that it's like a dedicated learning language, but it's dedicated beginning developer general use language to learn. Yeah. Which,
my thing was, I'm not a Python developer. I don't do much with Python. I mean, I know enough Python where I can hack on a Python script. If somebody gives it to me, I know what's going on in it. But that's part of the thing. When you give me a Python script, I can read it. I know what's going on. Where when you first get into Lisp, you don't know what the hell is going on in that thing.
And especially the scientific use also of Python and MATLAB and that stuff that shouldn't be underestimated, because like a lot of the good, proper science, math stuff happens there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good way to go.
The problem with Python is distribution, how to package it up for other people to use. Mm-hmm. For a scripting language, it's wonderful. For production deployment, it's not good. Somebody on the Jupyter broadcasting system said somebody is written into the Python team demanding that they redo the package system so that it can be usable for the next 30 years. So there's still complaints about the way packaging works in Python.
Python, I have some complaints too. As a complete noob, I don't do a lot of heavy Python development. Obviously, it's not something I'm into. But just as somebody that looking in from the outside, it does seem like everything is kind of hacked together. Like a lot of stuff wasn't thought out real well when it was all put together. Yeah, it's almost like it's a leaderless project, right? It's kind of like.
Well, let's hope it's not going to be JavaScript at some point, where it's just a plain horrible mess.
At one point, it was just Java. Everything was Java. At one point, the entire Android operating system was written in just Java.
True,
yeah.
So
Python right now is just suffering from the Java complex because people got sick and tired of Java, and Python is so much easier to read than Java is.
Oh yeah, that's a million times easier to read.
It's a million times easier because in Java, like the example for "Hello World" is like 7 lines long.
Yeah, right.
So I'm learning Elixir, spending a lot of time on that.
Yeah. It's
very Pythonish in its nature. It's got a REPL like IPython. It's got the corresponding REPL. Python has Jupyter Lab for handling code snippets. You can cut and paste code snippets and run them in that. And Elixir has Livebook, which is the same thing. And it's actually more elegant. It's much easier to use and much more elegant, and it's quite usable. And then you've got the projects. And Elixir is very opinionated, and the way it handles projects is a lot, in my opinion, a lot better than Python. And to distribute an Elixir app, you can do it by installing Erlang runtime on your target system. And then you can build your, say, a command line app, and it'll build it down to one single file, a la Go or a la app image, and you just distribute the single file across to your target system. And the overhead for that is 1.1 megabytes. So I did the sample, and all it does is print the command line arguments, and that was 1.1 megabytes. So then your actual app would be on top of that. But it reduces down to a much smaller size than you do with Python, and it looks like it's a lot easier to distribute.
Okay, well, Elixir is great and all, but might I introduce you to the master programming language, the one that runs everything, C. And we all recognize that Big Pod needs to completely rewrite all his projects in C because he just joined the chat.
If you want speed, you can't beat C on there too. I did 100 million element integer list in Python. It took about 15 seconds to create, so it must be using C under the hood, I would think. I did the same thing in Elixir terminal. It took 157 seconds because they're both being interpreted. But if you compile the Elixir code instead of running it in the terminal, it took 12 seconds opposed to Python's
most
15
compilers
seconds.
do actually run C.
Yeah, most programming languages, if you dive deep enough into them at the lowest level, they're writing things in C. You know?
It's either C or assembly, and I'll be honest, I prefer programming in C compared to assembly.
All right, Big Pod, your sound is
all of the programming languages basis C or C++ only.
Well, most languages go for either from their language to either compile down to machine code or some sort of intermediary language. Even C does that, if we're honest. C doesn't compile directly to machine code. That's why you need glibc in standard stuff. You cannot run based just on anything. That's why, for example, if you compile on GNU compile your code, it can't run on Android, even though C is completely supported. You need to statically compile because you need to have glibc in there.
Yeah, you have to compile it on the platform that you're...
Yeah. Either compile it on platform or completely statically compile, where it will actually include everything inside the binary. Just
really,
like
though, when we're talking about programming languages and what programming languages you should learn, it really depends entirely on what you're learning the programming language for. Personally, the way that I see it, like if you're developing like a programming language, or like say you're working with hardware and you're developing firmware and stuff like that, you probably should invest in like learning C. That way you can contribute upstream to like say the kernel itself.
Well, I don't know. Rust would be an option
well,
too.
Yeah, Rust is also an option, but really Rust isn't so prominent in that space yet that
it will be.
That you shouldn't avoid learning C. But it's
will
worthwhile to learn at least C.
Yeah,
whereas if you're working like the GUI space, maybe then you should probably like look into like your Python, your JavaScript, Java in general, C++, C#, and stuff like that.
I actually tried to learn Rust, but the thing is that there is no like good documentation for us available or some good tutorials. Whereas C++ has the same purpose and it has much better documentation and tutorials. I guess that is the only reason I failed to learn Rust yet.
Well, C++ has been around for forever. That's why there's good documentation, right?
And it has million features. Some of them basically are upgrades. One hasn't removed any. It's a problematic language from feature creep perspective. I don't like C++. I don't like C. They are both languages. They have their reason, but none of them are applicable to me because if I want to write anything that is performant, I'm going to either choose Go, Rust, or if I'm a tiny bit less on performance, I'm going to stick with C#.
He kind of shocked me with Go. I didn't expect him to say Go. You've been doing something with... Yeah.
Well, wow. I had to learn Go for something that I'm doing, and hopefully it will go well.
You going to try to leverage that Go knowledge into a job?
Yeah. I actually Actually, I had to learn Go in the middle of a job interview.
And is this job going to actually be at the Google campus, the headquarters, or no?
No, nowhere.
Is it Google related?
No.
That is a very unique use case.
That's a very good throwback to last Patreon.
Well,
All right, let's not interrogate.
Go is in containerization God language. That's the real situation. Docker is built on Go. Podman is built on Go.
Yep.
The best libraries for Kubernetes, Docker, Podman are all built on Go. Go is God language in Kubernetes and Docker. If you're in that space, you need to know it, and I am in that space.
And one reason to use a Go is that if you get tired of it, then you can just go away.
Well, I did appear on some streams this week, or at least one stream, actually of one company that I am part of their community. I know people there, and actually, I was putting a desktop application into a Docker container, showcasing how it can be done.
No, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, you can always leverage that into a job. You can train people.
Yeah.
That's what you...
Really, the theme of this is really don't learn just a specific language, just learn how to program, which it doesn't matter what language you learn first, just learn a language and then maybe pick up another language as you go, because you're not going to stick with just one programming language your entire life and career. You're going to be going through multiple.
There is one field where you can essentially, there are a few fields where you can essentially learn one language and you're done.
Fortran.
AI.
Yeah, if you know COBOL, you're good. Right?
That's the old school language, of course, Fortran, COBOL. But if you're in AI, Python, or if you're in data science, that is.
Well, AI is still a relatively new field. It's entirely possible that people are going to be dropping Python for a lot of these projects because of one of the issues that some projects like Home Assistant have, for example, is the speed of Python.
Yes, but on AI front, or let's be more specific, machine learning and other things that are under the AI umbrella, actually they actually use Python just as a glue language. Everything is actually then written in C by the specialists of that specific field. Whereas
I think you would be...
People in AI actually just write Python and use those libraries.
I think you would probably have no trouble staying employed for the rest of your life if you just knew Python and JavaScript. Like there'd always be a job somewhere.
Well, probably.
Yeah, there's no chance you'd ever be unemployed.
And there is not too long ago. There is not too long ago. There was some. I don't remember where it was, but there was some big government entity somewhere who were searching for COBOL programmers because they had some old equipment that was critical for the society. And,
NASA developed all their stuff in the 1950s and 1960s, and now there's nobody that knows how to use COBOL or Fortran.
Fortran. They use Fortran.
Yeah.
Well,
all of it is Fortran in NASA. A lot of it is Fortran.
Yeah. I totally didn't learn how to program COBOL in like a very basic sense to set up CNC mills before.
I mean, there's stuff floating around in space that was launched decades ago that you have to have somebody that knows Fortran to actually talk to that stuff.
There's out there. There's BASIC. The Voyager satellites.
That's right.
Were programmed in BASIC, and they use 8-track tapes for their system on it, right?
Yeah, the first Voyager, when did that launch? Was that the late 70s?
79,
yeah.
77.
77, I think.
Oh, well, there was Viking and then Voyager and all that stuff,
Yeah, but the two Voyager probes are still operating. I remember one of the NASA engineers who made that thing had a talk on one of the big conferences a few years ago. And it was a free software and open source oriented conference. I don't remember the name of it, but and I remember that the topic of the title of the talk was 17 something thousand a day uptime.
Yeah.
The James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to be launched December 22nd now, is $10 billion. It was supposed to be finished in 2007 for $500 million, and it's been taken 25 years to finish, and it's all going to be based on one fragile launch, December 22nd. I don't think anything's been than that. I'm
gonna say this. Please don't talk about JVST. I am basically shaking already because I'm hoping everything goes okay. I'm big in space and
does it run Ubuntu Mate?
I checked to see. Oh my God! I actually checked to see if there was any Linux in it. I couldn't find anything. It's all application-specific integrated circuits. Most of it.
I remember when the Columbia shuttle burned up on the re-entry. I think it's 20 years ago today, or 20 years ago this year. There was a Norwegian IT newspaper who had done an online article about because it was the first space shuttle that had a Red Hat system running Red Hat 7.1 or 7.3, I don't remember. And they had an article and where they talked about having new types of operating system that was secure and locked down. And but the only he was imagining that what could happen if some hackers logged into that thing and got root access. And 2 days later, the shuttle burned up and they depublished the article.
Actually, the Ariane 4 rocket, the James Webb is going up on the Ariane 5, which is about 15 years old. When they went from Ariane 4 to Ariane 5 rocket, they ported over some of the software.
Just don't.
Yeah, you know what it is. They left some of the 4 code in there that
it's running Windows Vista.
No, it was doing
embedded
doing the yes, you know it. You know the story. Yeah, overflow error.
I know it very well.
The code to monitor the gyroscopes or something was running, but it wasn't connected to any sensors. So after a minute, it got an integer overflow, and the system said, "Well, I can't guide this anymore. It's self-destructive." $300 million up in one shot.
They had a piece of code that only ran so that if rocket stayed on the launch pad for up to 40 seconds more than it was launch time, it could launch in any of those 40 seconds. And that code was supposed to shut down in 40 seconds after T0. And at 40 seconds directly it hit its maximum, and because another code gave it a 64-bit integer, and that was a 16-bit floating point or something like that.
Yeah.
16-bit unsigned or signed integer, and that was unsigned 64-bit int. It basically went, I don't know what is happening. You go left, and it just went. Vroom.
Yeah, it's one of those things in computer, code and computer speak. Integers are different than single float point numbers and double float point numbers. And if you give it, if it doesn't understand one of them,
and it actually, if it would be okay if it actually went from one to another. Problem was it went to overflow, so it went from 64,000 to 0. Or minus 30,000, depending on what it is.
Let me ask you something, Big Pod. I don't want to interrogate Big Pod. I know we keep asking questions about this company he's interviewing, and I don't want to get personal. But let me just ask one more thing. Does it involve rockets?
No.
Okay, I thought I was getting close.
I did rockets on my other.
No, I assume that Big Pod got hired by the SUSE project so he can rebase Ubuntu Mate to an OpenSUSE base.
No.
But that would be too much green. That would be green overkill right there.
Embrace the gecko. Embrace the gecko.
He said none of us will guess, so we might as well stop.
I'm sure we will find out eventually because his name will show up in contributions somewhere, and then we get to see which email tag he's using.
There is a contribution to that company's project already by me. So if you search hard enough on GitHub,
okay, everybody, start searching Git repositories. I'm certain that the name Big Pod will show somewhere.
Yeah, it could.
Or is GitHub up yet?
Yeah.
Does it come back up?
It is down yesterday.
That's a technicality, Derek.
Yeah, good luck searching GitHub right now.
Well,
It's done again.
I don't know. I was just joking, but it was down a few hours
I think
ago.
it was
Yeah,
down
it
like
was.
yesterday, wasn't it?
yeah, for a long time.
Yeah, and for a period of time, even the GitHub status page said that everything was fine and dandy, and yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen people say, hey, you wouldn't have this problem with GitHub or going down for your project or GitLab going down for your project if you just hosted your own. I was like, yes, then you would have to make sure your uptime was better than Microsoft's uptime for GitHub. Like, that's not realistic.
You had to make sure that your uptime was better than one of the top 3 hosting or cloud providers or GitLab, who is this other top 3 cloud providers.
Okay, fun fact for like networking and how these big corporate enterprise websites work. That website is in more than one location. So when you go to github.com, you could be showing up in Virginia, you could be showing up in California. It's mirrored across multiple servers in multiple different locations, just to add to redundancy. When you self-host, you're most likely only running one server.
Yeah. If you self-host one server, storage is most likely on the same device.
Yep.
No
storage
CDN.
is completely separate.
And you're more likely, like if something really bad happened to GitHub or to GitLab, your stuff is probably still going to be there when they finally get back up. Where on your one server, if something really bad goes wrong, I hope you had an off-site backup somewhere, right? Like if that server caught fire and burned up, right? Did you have your stuff backed up somewhere? Because GitHub does, GitLab does. They're not all in the same location, right?
I remember, I think it was this summer, there was a data center who burned down in France somewhere.
Yeah.
And there were 3 buildings in close together.
Was this data center related to EncroChat? They were suspecting some criminal stuff and whatsoever.
Yeah, so and in one of the IRC channels that I hang out with, they come. He runs data center for them in our capital in Norway, and he had a Twitter feed that he was following, and he said it was painful to read that because they support. Twitter account for the data center. The people were asking questions of, and there were several companies that went to bust because they had all the servers there, and they had a backup servers in the other data center who also burned down.
Yeah.
I heard a story, apocryphal it may be, the 9/11 towers went down. One of the Fortune 500 data centers went with it, and they had a backup, but it was in the other tower.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what the article said.
There's this phrase in the 3-step process of backup called the offsite backup, and they say at the minimum is the next town over.
Well, for natural disasters, it doesn't need to be in the same city, right? Because the entire city could burn down.
That's the point of offsite is that it's offsite.
Right.
That's why I mostly check what Microsoft is their cloud architecture with Azure. That's what I work.
I remember 20 years ago, or 19 years ago, the year after that Twin Towers collapsed, there was a documentary about ramifications of companies and so on. And one of the systems, there was a company who specialized in offsite backup, where you dialed in and stored backups. And they said that the first company who, 4 minutes after the first tower fell, the first dial-in came from someone requesting backup data.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and of course, that was, 20 years ago, I hope a lot of people are doing things better as far as backing up important sensitive data
They're really
than
not.
they were.
I've been looking.
You don't think so? I would
they're
hope so.
really not. Just remember, a lot of these large enterprise projects literally run off of a hope and a prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been looking at Cockroach Database, which is a subset of Postgres, but for distributed systems. And instead of backups, they are recommending you have extra nodes, so that if some nodes go down, and you can actually use those nodes in real time. So then if your system goes down, you've got these other nodes to get yourself back up.
Yeah.
Fully copied nodes. Yeah, that actually is a pretty smart solution so it's actually always hot, always directly available. But still, then you should probably have at least some backup. But as I said, for example, Azure, what they do is basically they have a minimum or maximum and minimum of 2 milliseconds of ping between one data center, and they always build them in pairs or trees. So direct fiber between them needs to be at max and at minimum of 2 milliseconds.
Yeah.
So that if one of them gets struck by any kind of natural disaster, the other one will be still okay.
Well, I trust anything that Microsoft does as far as backups, because obviously $1 trillion company has a lot of important data. Like I trust Azure, I trust Amazon, AWS, I trust
GCP.
Google, like because they have so much stuff that they have
They
to
know what they're doing.
Right.
People that know what they're doing to such a degree that
It's sites like Truth.social that I'm kind of concerned about, or like these general purpose sites that just randomly get popular and explode, stuff like that concerns me.
Or random hosting provider that pops up today. I'm probably not gonna trust that guy.
Well, too many. We're talking about like web hosting providers. I mean, you should go with a name you actually know, because
you really should.
Right. If you've never heard of them, I don't care how cheap they are, don't sign up.
Yeah.
I do my own hosting.
Yeah, so do I.
Anyone used S3 storage?
I have.
Yeah. I'm using it now.
My primary backup is actually S3 that further backs up to Amazon Glacier.
Do you use a web interface at all? Or do you access it from the command line?
I access it from the command line.
Rclone.
So what I do is I use S3 just to back up all of my video data, because it's a lot of terabytes of video. And I actually don't use the command line interface. I use a FTP program.
Yeah, that'll work too.
Yeah,
to connect.
That's old school.
Yeah, FileZilla, it still works.
Yeah, I love FileZilla. I've used FileZilla longer than I've used Linux, because I used FileZilla back on Windows because it's free and open source software and it's cross-platform. So I knew about FileZilla before I knew about Linux. So
same about 7-zip probably.
7-zip, yeah, from way back in the day. That's a great program.
Yep.
Yeah. And the reason I knew about 7-zip wasn't because it was free and open source software. As far as the freedom part, it was because it was free, as in I didn't want to pay for WinZip, right?
Did somebody actually purchase one of these WinRAR or WinZip?
I actually have a lifetime subscription for WinRAR. That said, I've never been able to use it on any of the platforms that I run, but I support the company just offering WinRAR for free indefinitely.
Wow.
I'll give you $20.
Yeah, I mean, I'll support it because I want it to be around, even if I don't.
It's so funny how strange it is to think about paying for something like WinZip and WinRAR now, because we're like, why would you pay for that? Like, it makes no sense to pay for the ability to archive some files.
But who remembers PKZip?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
You can still install PKZip.
Yeah,
it still works.
Matter of fact,
I used that for many years on Windows 2000 even, because then I didn't have to pay for WinZip or WinRAR and so on. So whenever I could, I used the PK tools. Up until 2005 or 6, there was a documentary about the BBS scene, and the last video was about the PK zip and the Software Enhanced Associates lawsuit that was in the late 1980s. It turned out that the guy who founded the PKware, he copied the source code and renamed it PKZip, and it worked exactly the same. And when the lawyers eventually got to see the source code, he was ordered by the court to provide the lawyers access to the source code, and even the comments were the same, with the same spelling errors.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And since I heard that, I have never touched the PKware ever since.
Well, it's strange because you're going to copy some proprietary software and then you're going to license it under a proprietary license, because I guess they were hiding their code. I'll copy it and then I'll try to hide it so they can't see that I copied it. I'm surprised it didn't work, actually. I'm surprised someone figured it out.
Yeah, but the SC software, they released the source code because back in those days it was still normal to ship the source code, even if it was had a license that you had to follow.
Yeah, that would suck if you stole somebody's work and then they did a code dump and then put the code out there. It's like, oh, I could have just waited for them to release the code.
With Windows XP?
Yeah, it's like, well, yeah, go ahead, Big Brian.
The problem with that is that technically if code is dumped, you still can't use it.
Yeah, because it's still licensed under the proprietary license. But, yeah, I mean, still, if you put it out there.
That's it. If you're writing proprietary software and nobody can access the software easily without uncompiling it, then that's not stopping anybody from just using that.
If they have reasonable level of knowing that you might have copied or might have violated their copyright license, they could get a court order for you to show the code.
Just remember the scripts that you're copy pasting off of Stack Exchange is technically speaking all rights reserved here in the US.
Yes.
To Stack Exchange?
Yeah. Oh, not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's reserved to Stack Exchange.
I wonder how they, because legally, wouldn't it belong to the person that posted that code? I mean, that was.
It's part of the terms of use for making a Stack Exchange account. If you sit there and read it, it says like all code that you post on here belongs to Stack Exchange.
Wasn't there a controversy over 10 years ago with Facebook and photos?
I believe so.
Yeah. Because Facebook, even though you post your personal photos there, I guess technically it's Facebook their property.
Yeah, we own those.
But yeah.
It's on our servers. It's ours.
But that kind of stuff I don't think would ever really hold up in court. Like if Stack Exchange wanted to sue somebody for using code that was like, a judge would be like, well, you didn't create this code. Somebody else freely put it. I don't know. I just wonder how that would stand up in court.
Well, I think that is more so that I think from my opinion that actually Stack Exchange then has control over the code. So then if let's say the person who wrote that code and put it on Stack Exchange or Stack Overflow, whatever, then decided to sue someone who used it, it wouldn't be his code. They can. So only they can, and they won't, because that's the kind of point of the site.
Probably the point of that being in their terms of service, though, is that Stack Overflow doesn't want people scraping their site. Is probably like the entire site, and that's how they get around it.
And probably another problem, because then they actually get around the problem that let's say I write something, then I decide like 5 years after I wanna sue Stack Overflow for actually having that code on.
Yeah.
Because technically they should have deleted. I say they should have deleted it.
Speaking of scraping scraping Stack Overflow. I'm sure you guys have seen that YouTube channel that scrapes all the questions and answers from Stack Overflow and then posts them as individual videos.
No.
This dude's got like over 1 million videos posted. Because he's posting like hundreds a day, and he's got some kind of script that automates the process. Obviously,
it's a very unique way to game the YouTube algorithm, because you can see that he's deleting hundreds of videos a day too, and he's just constantly re-uploading them.
Interesting.
And I'm just wondering. I'm wondering what the point is. I'm sure he makes a little money off of it, but it's not like these videos. When you're posting so many videos,
proof of concept,
they're not even getting any views. Most of them never get a single view, because who's going to find these videos when you're spamming YouTube?
If you're not keywording them in the, if you're not if you're not transcribing them in the description, how are they going to find it?
Well, they probably are going to be with closed captions, and those CCs are added to structured data.
Google does so much more than those keywords actually matter very, very, very little nowadays. Description itself matters very little, because most what matters is actually the title and the actual content of the video.
No, because now they know the actual words in the video because of the subtitles. Like they know the content of the video.
And if you do the chaptering too,
And the big thing with like videos like that is they actually do show up because we know about them somehow. So it could just be that he's just constantly posting things over to his YouTube channel.
We know about him somehow because he posts so many.
Yeah.
If you do anything tech related, programming related, Linux related, Emacs related, because Emacs is a big topic on Stack Overflow, like you're gonna get videos from this guy served to you.
Yeah,
and it's obvious because they all have the same kind of thumbnails and everything. And it's just it's a bad look for YouTube, because it's obvious.
It's a bad look for YouTube, but it does give you your answer.
Because they get spammed. YouTube gets spammed with all this crap, and they don't seem to be able to stop it or be interested in stopping it.
Well, they don't really care.
Right. Of course not.
That's a drop in the option.
I mean, YouTube doesn't care about the video as long as the user is still on YouTube.
Yeah.
As long as their advertisers are happy, they don't care.
Yeah, that's true. And nothing of any like what could be,
Well, I can understand why they have a problem with the spam bots as far as the comment bots.
Yeah.
But when people are spamming videos, I think that should be something.
I would think they should fix like the comment section before they fix the video problem.
Yeah,
right.
The comment section is actually a lot more important than people know.
Yeah. Interaction is what counts. It's time users spending time on the platform, watching more ads, more interaction. It's basically just in the end, it's all over. Google is interested.
That's what
keep them on the platform. Keep them going.
Watch time, audience engagement, which is whether they like or dislike, and whether they send comments.
Well, you can't dislike anymore. We're taking care of that.
You can,
you can still hit the dislike button. You just can't see how many.
And that's so ridiculous.
There's rumors to why they did that, but I won't get into that here.
The public response that YouTube said for why they're doing it was like people just spam downvoting things just for the sake of being trolls. Is just,
they do.
It's not going to change anything.
Yeah, what does that matter?
It's literally not going to change anything. If anything,
I can tell you, if I post a video tomorrow, that within 10 seconds of me posting that video, I'm going to have at least 2 thumbs down. Why? It's because there's somebody out there that's created this bot. Therefore, it doesn't matter what I post. I'm talking about within seconds. I'm going to get those thumbs. But does it matter? Is it hurting my feelings? Am I a damaged, broken person because I saw the thumbs down? No.
You can't please everybody.
If you create a stream or upload a video with Ubuntu in its name, you're gonna get at least 1 thumbs down, no matter what is happening.
I'm just
System D, right? Put System D in the title.
Put Ubuntu in the title, you're gonna get thumbs down right away. That's
snaps.
I've seen that on my own streams. Before I started streaming, I had a thumbs down.
I'm going to put this to the test. I'm going to do An Ubuntu with snaps and System D title. Like all together.
Do it. Just
well, guys,
just name it. Just name it Ubuntu, snaps, and System D.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up at the end of the 2 hours. Let's get everybody a chance to get a last word in. So, Ben, you want to take a minute to say something? You've been occupied with your Gentoo installation for a while, but you want to give us a last word? You got anything you want to? Maybe.
You can do it, Ben.
One second. Pulse audio.
Glad to be here today, and thanks for having me.
All right, Ben. Well, I hope you get your Gentoo installation straight. I'm sure Josh is probably going to get that straight for you.
He'll be there too to help us.
Yeah, I'm going to hang out as soon as this is over. I'll make me a cup of coffee. I'll hang out for a few minutes, see if we can't get you straight.
All right, cool.
Big Bud, give us the last word.
Have a nice month, and let's remember that immutable file system-based operating systems are the future of Linux, and we should start working on it right away. Reason for that: watch part 1 of Linus Tech Tips Linux Challenge.
Oh, I thought this was going to be part of your new job. I thought he was going to work for GNU Geeks.
No.
Or NixOS.
I don't think anybody gets paid for those projects.
Or Silverblue. No, you're right.
Silverblue, yes, probably, but I don't know about Geeks or NixOS.
Nix isn't, I'm sure. I know.
I'm sure. Yeah, of course. It's all community. Yeah.
Well,
thank you for the super chat there, Chris, in the chat. He says, hello, DT. Thank you for your effort to make Linux popular. Your message reached me. I abandoned Windows for Linux. Good, sir. And now I use Manjaro Linux, and I'm very happy with it. Well, I'm glad it's working out for you. You made the smart choice. I'm glad you chose Manjaro instead of some of the other ridiculous things you could have chosen, because Josh is going to troll you and say you should have chose Gentoo. That would have been the wrong choice.
Actually, no.
I think Josh has reached past that.
George, you want to give us a last word, sir?
Well, thanks again for hosting, and as always, enjoy the videos and a great little community you got here, and I enjoy hanging out.
Yeah, these are always fun. I'm glad you joined us again. For those of you that are unsure who George is, he sometimes goes as Other George because, the names on Jitsi sometimes change. Josh, you're always Josh, so I think everybody knows you, but give us a last word.
Well, for one thing, I want to say that Gentoo is not the greatest distribution. That actually goes hands down to Fedora. Because Fedora has this wonderful thing called hats. And hats are awesome, and we should all go back to wearing hats in our daily lives.
I actually can pull off the hat. Like, I look okay in a hat.
Well, yeah,
not everybody does.
You know what a hat does? It hides your bald head, because we all know that DT is bald.
Oh, good.
I obviously have hair. I mean, they're, like I can scratch it. Like you can hear there's hair there.
Yeah, you can see the line now, but it's that's where the downvotes come from, is people didn't like being called out for the bald comments.
Yeah. That's what it is when I mention I'm not bald. The bald people actually get mad and downvote because they're jealous of my full head of hair. So. Josh. Yeah. All right, let's get a last word from Root, who is not Root. You guys know him as Murray.
Well, it's fun as usual. Just to continue the astronomy a bit, there's one of the universities in California. It's not Berkeley. I can't remember which. They converted their Rust drives to SSDs, 300 terabytes. And they're doing what used to take a week to do, they can do in an hour now on it. So SSDs becoming more affordable is changing things quite a bit. I'm doing Elixir again. I've done it for the last month, and I'll be doing it again for the next month. And it's so far so good. It's a lot of fun. If you like Python and you want to learn something about functional programming, Elixir's pretty good. But it is so big, and there's so much to it. It's almost overwhelming. But I'm thinking,
is it bloated, Murray? Is that where you were going with it?
No, it's does a lot on it, and it's designed to do a lot, and it's different. It's all about processes and functional language and monitoring what you're doing and distributing code and distributing data. So
because there's a lot of people in our community, especially like when you tell them about a programming language and they go to download it and it's a big download, they immediately get repulsed by it.
Well,
Is
Well,
is that the case with Elixir?
no, the runtime, it's based on Erlang. The Erlang runtime is 200 megabytes. Python's closer to 400 megabytes. The Elixir interpreter is only about 7 megabytes on it, and it can generate pretty concise code. I'll know more about it after the next month. I've got more to do. I'm still just learning, crawling my way around, but it's just, there's so much to it. It's on it, but it's really good. I haven't seen anything yet that says, no, I don't like this about it.
Well, we will be looking forward to your report on Elixir next month. And I may have a report of my own next month, because I think for the month of December, I've decided I'm really going to dive quite a bit deeper into Emacs Lisp. Well,
that'd be good. Yeah. Okay, thanks again.
All right, thanks, Mary. Stefan, give us the last word, sir.
Well, thanks as always for the chat. A lovely community and fun times as usual. Really appreciate it here. And regarding the OS choice, I just gotta say, as usual, like every OS is fine. Don't be lazy. try to invest a little bit of your headspace. Life is so comfortable. Try to understand the machine you're using. You'll have a better time. But if you don't want to, it's fine as well. Just try to do as good as you can, and don't ever always listen to Linus Tech Tips. And
well, also I think you're talking about learn a little. These days, our operating systems all operating systems have gotten so much easier to use than they were.
It's too
10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Life became too comfortable, I guess. And,
right.
You gotta challenge yourself and keep going. I dug a little into Haskell. It's a wonderful world. I did a little bit more with Ruby. It's also since we were talking about Elixir, it's wonderful to do.
Haskell is deep. Haskell's deep.
Haskell's probably the most difficult language to learn.
That's true.
Yeah, it's and I like playing with Haskell.
Yeah, you can play with it. It's basically it's there, and you can go down to the root and get lost in some rabbit holes. And
I will say it's a good learning experience.
Yeah.
Like people, well, why would I learn Haskell? What's it good for? Well, once you've learned a little Haskell, like it kind of makes sense. Like the things you learn do translate to other languages.
Yeah, one developer said he couldn't drop Haskell, but it made him a better Elixir program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actual languages are a chore, no matter what.
I see somebody arguing about file sizes in the chat already. If you want to really reduce your file size, replace all your spaces with tabs for your indentations. It will actually shrink your file size.
I want to say about Linus Tech Tips. What I
go
think
ahead.
is he actually went in thinking Linux is going to be a drop-in replacement for Windows.
Yes,
That's what I think he thought. That's why.
I think the purpose of this video series is to prove that Linux does have issues.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of those things, and I've made a couple of videos this past month with the same problem. Linus thinks Linux is a 1-for-1 replacement to Windows. It's not. I think my Emacs video that I did a couple of weeks back about people using Emacs
wrong.
The wrong way is people thinking Emacs is Vim when it's not the same program. That's like totally different.
I have a different take on the Linus thing. Is that I think that knowing how things work behind the scenes in business and especially to a degree in media, I have to say I think this is just one big troll. I
think part of it is to be entertaining.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
actually he said on the last Van show that if it wasn't gaming and the specific hardware he had for gaming like Go XLR, he would be completely okay with Linux.
Yeah.
No matter what operating it is.
Yeah, and the upcoming episode, number 3, is going to be the average home user who is not gaming.
Other stuff.
Yeah.
Gaming
gaming
is problematic on Linux. Everything else is just fine.
Yeah. Well, let's get the last word from Solbu.
Yeah. So since the last live stream, I've been acquiring two UPS systems because the ones I had had poor batteries, so I had replacements. One of the UPS systems that I found at a local that is available at one of the local Norwegian shops. It is you have to order it, special order. It is one battery and it takes 5 completely full rack spaces, and it costs $200,000. So I have.
Nice.
I have to.
You completely disappeared on us.
Yeah, I have to turn off my.
Yeah, you have to turn off the background filter.
He's got the green screen going.
I can guarantee you that UPSs that are that big are not designed for like your home server rack. They're designed for the enterprise data center to run like 6 or 7 different servers.
So this one here.
Yeah.
This is one UPS and it costs $200,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
and it can
for
run my house.
uptime.
Yeah, and it can run my house for 7 days.
Yeah.
Check what Linus Tech Tips has for his UPS server room. It's an actual rack.
Yeah. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, Solbu. Let's get a last word from John. Is John with us? I don't know if we've heard from him.
I don't think I've heard him ever.
Yeah, he might not have a mic hooked up. If he jumps in, we'll get a last word from him. But while we wait, I will give my last word. So obviously, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with us on camera, all the patrons that could be here on camera. There were a few that were here earlier that dropped off. I know one of them was Jean-Michel, who didn't get to say anything. He joined us for a few minutes, and then I guess he had an internet connection issue. He messaged me on Patreon to let you guys know about it and to say, hey, he hopes everybody has a good time in the chat, and he'll see us.
GitHub.
Yeah, it could be. There's the GitHub servers are causing the issue. I also want to thank all the patrons that couldn't be here. So I'm going to show a list of names here on the screen for the patrons. And then, of course, I need to thank everybody that is in the YouTube chat as well, because you guys, your questions and comments in the YouTube chat are always welcome. And I know you guys are usually oftentimes you guys are having a better conversation in the YouTube chat than what we're having on camera. But unfortunately, sometimes that's hard for us to monitor what you guys are talking about. And other than that, John, if he hasn't joined us for a last word, we will go ahead and shut it down. Yeah, I guess he is not connected. So let's go ahead and wave bye to YouTube.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Take care.
See you next time.
Install Gentoo on your Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.